right. So, how many of you guys enjoyed the night so far? How many of you guys missed camp already? Don't worry, it's only like a year away. I get to kick off a brand new series today called Check the Source. This is a really cool series that our teaching team kind of came together and selected. We specifically put it after camp because, again, at camp you guys had this life-changing week. Many of you guys, I see you come back with the energy and come back with the hype. But it's important that you guys take those next steps and kind of understand as far as, okay, where can I continue my path, continue my learning? And this whole series is all about looking at key verses. Does anybody still remember a verse from camp? I'm not going to ask you for it. I'm not going to ask you for it. 1,000,000 points to everybody. So I'm not going to ask you for it. But we're in this series, we're going to be looking at different verses, right? But what I want to challenge you guys to do is we're going to look at some of these verses that are people's favorite verses. They're the most popular verses. But we're going to look at the context around it. That's why we say check the source. Because there are these singular verses. Maybe it's like one or two lines or one or two verses. But we want you guys to get in the habit of reading more and more and more of your Bible. So in this series, like I said, we're going to be looking at the context around those key verses. And I get to open it up with a verse, Jeremiah 29:11. Has anybody ever heard that verse, know of that verse? Jeremiah 29:11. If not, don't worry, I'm going to read it in a little bit. And then probably when I read it, you guys will recognize it. But like I said, the Bible's kind of broken up in a lot of different ways. And it gets smaller and smaller as you go along. So the first way the Bible's broken up, I hope you guys know this already. But we have our Old and we have our New Testament. Everyone understand that? Everybody at least know that? Yes? Yeah, okay, cool. How many books are there in the Bible total? 66. Okay. So, Old and New Testament, there's 66 books total. But even those books are broken up into chapters. And then even within those chapters, there's full-on passages within those chapters for some of them. And then in those passages are the key verses that we kind of read, that we use for camp as far as the verse of the day and stuff like that. So today, the verse that I'm going to read it right now if you can put it up on the screen. Jeremiah 29:11, maybe you guys have heard it before. It says, "For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord. Plans to prosper you, not to harm you. Plans to give you hope and a future." Now, how many of you guys have heard that verse before? More people. All right. So, this verse sounds very good, right? Who wants a future? Who wants hope? And who wants to, prosper? That should be like everybody's hand, right? So, this is why a lot of people love this verse, because it's super encouraging. And the purpose of this verse was to encourage some people during a time period. And it's encouraging to us still today. But when you look at the context around the verse, I think it takes the encouragement to a whole other level. So what we're actually going to do is we're going to read through the actual chapter of chapter 29. So we're going to kind of work our way backwards. But before we start reading, I want to give you guys some context about the book of Jeremiah. So the book of Jeremiah takes place during, can I get the handheld? This mic's kind of weird, feedbacky. In the meantime, I'll continue teaching. The book of Jeremiah takes place during a time when Israel's pretty much in exile. And I kind of mentioned it my last night at camp, where Israel, they had their own nation, their own kingdom. But then eventually, God was trying to warn them as far as this bad that was going to happen, this bad that was going to happen. And then eventually they didn't listen. And then what ended up happening was this other nation of Babylon came, pretty much destroyed Jerusalem, and then took them back to Babylon. And the whole book of Jeremiah takes place in thanks. 5. There we go. Thank you. The whole book of Jeremiah takes place during that exile period, where they were taken from their homes, they were taken from their nation, they were taken from the promised land, and now they're in a foreign place. They're a place that's totally against them, totally against their beliefs. They're everything. It's completely against them. So they were losing a lot of hope because they were taken from their homes and now they're in this foreign land. And like I said, because everything's against them, a lot of the Israelites are kind of losing hope. They're like, this is not what we pictured. We were in the promised land before and now we're in a foreign land and they're totally against us. What do we do? And Jeremiah was this prophet, and a prophet simply just spoke for God. That's what they're pretty much like a microphone for God. And Jeremiah has some encouragement for them in chapter 29. We're going to start in verse 4 and verse 6, and we'll see how encouraging these words actually are. So, in verse 4, it says, "This is what the Lord Almighty, the God of Israel, says to all those I carried into exile from Jerusalem to Babylon. He says, build houses and settle down. Plant gardens, eat what you produce, marry and have sons and daughters. Find wives for your sons and daughters in marriage so that they too may have sons and daughters. Increase their number, do not decrease." So this is kind of odd because they're in this foreign land where they didn't think they were going to be. And God pretty much says, settle down. So imagine you're having you're going through a rough time and you've been praying to God, God, I need help. I don't have hope. And God says, get comfortable right there. Does that sound encouraging? Yeah, I mean, for you. For me, that doesn't sound as encouraging. I'm in this place that I feel uncomfortable. I feel like I don't belong here. And God's first thing that he tells me is, hey, get comfortable. And when you think about it too, he says as far as build homes, if you're going to build a home, that means you're going to be there for a while. He didn't say put up a tent. He said build homes. So you might have to stay in that uncomfortable spot. And that's kind of weird because how is this supposed to be encouraging to the people? Why is God telling them to kind of settle down with where they're at? And the reason that he's telling them that is because he's saying all the different trials and troubles and different things that may come in our life, we can't stop living. We still have a life that we can live. We still have a morning we wake up to. We still got friends we can hang out with. We still have life that we can live. But sometimes when we face those difficult circumstances, when we focus so much on those, we forget how to live. We forget how to just enjoy the smaller things in life. When we think about the stuff that he tells them to do, building a home, that's an exciting thing. Imagine building your dream house. You get to do that. That's a fun thing. It's not fun because you're not in the ideal place you want to be in, but he goes on to say, find husbands, find wives, have your kids find husbands, find wives. That's a joyous thing, finding relationships and building relationships. So he's challenging them, despite the circumstance that you're in, get comfortable there and remember to continue living on, continue pushing on. And this is going to be a short teaching. Let's continue on. We're going to jump back in verse 7. So they're supposed to get comfortable where they're at. Let's see what else God tells them to do. He says, also seek peace and prosperity of the city to which I have carried you into exile. Pray to the Lord for it, because if it prospers, you will prosper. So not only do they have to get comfortable in this foreign land, not only do they have to continue to live, but now they're also praying for this nation that is pretty much their enemy. They're praying for the situation that brings them discomfort. They're praying for the situation that is causing them a lot of stress. And again, how many of you guys still sound encouraged? You got to be uncomfortable? You're encouraged? That's you. So it sounds weird. How is any of this encouraging? Why do I have to pray for my enemies? Why do I have to pray when the circumstance that I'm looking at seems stressful and seems annoying? Why do I have to do that? When you think about school, right? How many of you guys pray for your teachers, even that teacher that you already hate? Because I know you got them. I know there's that one teacher, day one, you're already I'm not going to rock with this dude. How many of you guys pray for that teacher? One person. Shout out to you. How many of you guys pray for those friends that are causing all the drama in your life? Okay, that's good. So that's what God is telling them to do. He's saying, settle in the city that you're at. I know it's not what I promised you. I know it's in a foreign land. I know they're totally against you. But pray for your enemies and pray for that city. And that sounds crazy to me. But the truth is, when we're able to pray, what it does is it takes that off of our minds and our hearts and it gives it over to God. Because what happens when you hold on to that anger or that frustration is it just builds and builds and builds and builds, and you become bitter and angry and depressed. And it's important that we're able to release that back to God. And the big way that we do that is through prayer. So that's why he challenges them. He says, hey, settle down there, and then also pray for the people that are against you. And then let's read in verse 8 and 9 and see what he goes on to say. Let's see if we get more encouragement in this verse. He says in verse 8, he says, yes, this is what the Lord Almighty, the God of Israel, says. Do not let the prophets and diviners among you deceive you. Do not listen to the dreams you encourage them to have. They are prophesying lies to you in my name.
I have not sent them, declares the Lord. So a little bit of context for this verse. Sometimes when we go through hard times, when we go through struggles, what's one thing we do? We go and seek advice, right? We seek advice from friends, from family, and all this sort of stuff. And during this time, they were doing the same exact thing. They were seeking help. They were seeking advice because, again, they're in this foreign land where they're uncomfortable, where they know they're not supposed to be. They're frustrated. They're angry. So they're going and seeking advice. And in the chapter just before 29 and 28, there's this other prophet who's not really a true prophet like Jeremiah. And he's pretty much just telling them what they like to hear. He's just telling them stuff that'll make them feel nice on the inside, right? And what he says is like, don't worry, like, we're not going to be here that long. We only going to be here for 2 years. Like, don't worry, we'll be good. And actually, when I come back, like, God's going to come back and we're going to defeat all these people and we're going to kill them all. It's crazy. Y'all go read 28. 28's exciting. You think the Bible's boring? That dude was about that life. But he was saying all this stuff, right? And then, of course, it sounded good to them. Because when you're struggling, when you're in a situation you don't like, advice sounds great. That's why we go out and seek advice, right? But all advice is not good advice. And good advice is not always godly advice, too. And I think that's what happens to a lot of us. We go and seek advice in the wrong places, and they tell us stuff that aren't really stuff that are going to be helpful to help us continue to grow and to help us actually truly deal with these situations. And even, too, sometimes we do go to people who maybe they do have good intentions, and they do maybe even are Christians, but they might not always give you the most godly, the best advice. And this is what he's warning them of. You're in this foreign land where you need to settle down, you need to pray for your enemies, and those people who are trying to make you feel good, they're all liars. Any encouragement for you guys yet? No. So that encouraging verse that we heard of was kind of insane. And we're going to read in verse 10, and it's going to get more encouraging, I promise, guys. In verse 10, so remember, that guy said they were only going to be there for 2 years. Let's see what God says in verse 10. This is what the Lord says. When 70 years are complete, 70, 7-0. That is like, I don't know the math on that. Does anybody know the math on that? 2 to 7 or 70? Anybody? More than double. I know that much. So God says they're going to be there for 70 years, not 2 years, for 70 years. And then he says, I'll come to you, fulfill my good promise to bring you back to Jerusalem, to that place, right? So they're in this foreign land where they don't want to be, where they're uncomfortable. God says, settle down, pray for your enemies, don't listen to these liars, and oh yeah, you're going to be there for a while. Anybody encouraged yet? No. That whole verse is like, all right, but good news. 11 is the next verse, is the very, very next verse. And in chapter 11, where we got that verse that we read in the beginning. And this is where God then encourages them. For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord. Plans to prosper you, not to harm you. Plans to give you a hope and a future. So after everything we read, how is this verse still encouraging? How is this verse still hopeful? And I want to break down this specific verse a little bit more. And well, the word I want to look at, if you could keep it up there, is that word prosper. When I say the word prosper, what comes to mind? Yell it out. Growth. What else? Rich. There we go. Prosper. What else? Succeed. What else? Wealth. What else? Success. Let's hear a couple more. Abundance. Yes. Prosper. Let's hear one more. Safety. Cool. So, prosper. Despite all of this stuff, God still says that my plan is still to prosper you. And when I hear the word prosper, I think more so along the lines, just being real, of money. I think I'm going to be rich. I think I'm going to be wealthy. I think I could just buy whatever the heck I want. Like that's what I think when I think about prosper. I think I'm going to be the richest man in the world, right? And a lot of people, when they read this verse, that's what they think about. They think about material things, or they think about physical things. They think about prospering in a physical way. But when you look at that verse, when you truly, truly break down that verse, the Bible is also written in a bunch of different languages, because English didn't exist back in Jesus' time. If you didn't know that, Jesus didn't speak English. Surprise. But when you read it in the original language that I was written in, the word prosper is actually a Hebrew word, and that Hebrew word is shalom. How many of you guys have ever heard that word, shalom? What does that word mean? Peace. Peace. So when you look at that word again, it's really plans to give you peace. But when you look deeper in that word, one of the other things that shalom means, it means completeness and it means fullness. It means completeness and it means fullness. And if I asked you what's your favorite food in the whole world, just whatever it is, yell it out. Bacon. Bacon? I can't say that, so I ain't even gonna try. What else? Pizza. What? Big Macs? Alfredo? So, your favorite food, right? Imagine you're super full. Like you're just full to the max. Even if it's your favorite food, like you're straight. You don't need no more. Like you're full, you're satisfied, you are good. And that's what God's telling them you're gonna be. He says, like, you're gonna be full. I promise to make you full. In this foreign land, in this land that you're not supposed to be in, I'm gonna bring you fullness. But the thing about that is the only thing that could provide us that fullness where we can truly not want anything is God. And now we're gonna read past 11 and we get some more encouragement here in 12 and 13. And this is kind of the last verses I'll read. After all of that, then he says, then you will call on me and come and pray to me, and I will listen to you. You will seek me and find me when you seek me with all of your heart. So all that stuff we talked about that sounded kind of super discouraging, honestly, in the beginning, as far as being in this foreign land where you're meant to be comfortable and where you got to pray for your enemies and where you're going to be there for 70 years and people are lying for you. It's in those struggles, it's in those times that you just are really, really just feel like you're in the bottom. Those are the times where you're the most hungry for God. Those are the times you want the most of God. And what this verse tells us is that when we seek God with all of our heart, when we're at our most desperate point, that's when God draws nearest back to us. So in that verse, when we have that perspective of, God, that one song that we all sung at camp that I still love, of just nothing else. When we're at that point of nothing else and all we want is God, that's when we get to that place of fullness. That's where we get to that place where once we are so desperate for God, we get more of God. And the more God we get, the more full we get of God. And the more full we get of God, the less and less we want, the less and less we care about those circumstances that are around us. So my main point and my only point for tonight's teaching is when we think to that verse, we can always find hope and prosper because we always have God the provider. We could always find hope and prosper because we always have God the provider. And that's the main, when I look at that Jeremiah 29:11 verse, that's what it really means to me. We have this God who's this provider. And he's not just this provider of the things that we want, but he's the provider of the things that we need. Because I think we have this God who's willing to provide for us. Yes, if we're praying for whatever, if it's a financial help, God can provide that, no problem. But he can also provide things that money can't buy. He can provide hope. He can provide peace. He can provide hope. He can provide all these things so that we don't want anything. When we're facing those circumstances where we're in that foreign land, maybe you're in a school right now and you already hate it. You already wish you were back home. When you're in that place where you're just constantly uncomfortable, that's when you could rely on God the most, and that's when he could be that joy that you have to where even though it's a school you don't like, you still walk around with joy. You still walk around with hope. You still walk around with a peace that you can't describe, that you can't explain, but that only comes when you want more and more and more of God. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to read that Jeremiah 29:11 verse one more time, and then I'm going to close out in prayer, and then we're going to hang out for the rest of the night. No small groups tonight. I know school just started, so we're going to kind of just vibe out for the rest of the night. Yeah, you can be happy about that. Love you too, bro. But I want to read this verse one more time. Just one more time, I want to read this Jeremiah 29:11 verse. And I want you to truly meditate on that promise that God will prosper us. And it's not going to be a physical prosper. It's going to be a prosper where we don't want anything physical because we have so much of God. We have all this joy. We have all this hope. We have all this purpose. that despite whatever circumstance we're in, we could walk in that purpose. We could walk in that joy, and we could be the light that this world needs. So Jeremiah 29:11, one more time. For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, the God provider. Plans to prosper you, not to harm you. Plans to give you hope and a future. And I'm going to ask everybody to bow their heads and kind of close their eyes. And I want to pray for some people because, again, maybe school started already and you're already stressed and you're already overwhelmed. And you're like, Colin, this message sounds cool and all, but I don't have any hope right now. And I definitely don't think there's even a good future in store for me. Or maybe outside of school, you're dealing with other kind of relationship-related issues, whether that's annoying friends or drama around friends or boy drama, girl drama, or family drama, whatever it is. Maybe that's causing you all this stress where it's just like, Colin, I don't got this hope. I don't got this joy that you were just talking about. I don't have that. Or maybe it's even deeper than that, because another thing that people use this verse for is we talk about people who are dealing with, they need healing, right? Whether that's a physical healing, whether that's a spiritual healing, an emotional healing, whatever type of healing that is, a lot of people look to this verse, and I think it's important that we can look to this verse as well for those situations. So what I want to do is if you're in need of some hope, if you're in need of some prayer, the one thing that, like I said, can give you that fullness, that can give you that hope, that can give you that just, I don't need anything anymore, is Jesus. He's the one provider, that one person who could be there for you. And we did some opportunities at camp to give you guys the opportunity to accept Jesus as your Lord and Savior. But I want to do that again, especially as we kick off this school year, because these schools need more Christ followers. These schools need more believers in Jesus. But you may need that just for yourself right now. So if you've never accepted Jesus as your Lord and Savior, if you've never experienced that hope and that joy and that peace that we can find in Jesus, I'm going to ask you to just raise your hand really quick, and then you can shoot it back down. You got to hold it up. I just want to kind of see who I'm praying for. And again, if you've never accepted Jesus, I want to give you the opportunity right here, because you have this God provider. You have this person who's willing to be your everything, so you want nothing. So I'm going to ask you one more time, if that's you in this room, you've never accepted Jesus, just shoot up your hand really quick, just so I can see who I'm praying with. All right, so I want you guys to repeat after me, and that's everybody, just so we don't kind of single a person out. But we're going to pray this prayer to accept Jesus into our lives, and maybe you didn't raise your hand, but your heart's there and you just felt weird about it. It's okay. I don't need to see you to be saved. As long as God sees you and God sees your heart, that's who needs to see. That's who needs to see you. So I want everybody to repeat after me. God, I understand that I'm in need of some saving. Because God, I understand that without you, I am nothing but a sinner. But God, I believe you sent your son to live a perfect life that I could not. And he lived that perfect life and then took on the punishment that I deserved. But he would rise 3 days later and defeat death. And it's because of what he did on the cross and him rising 3 days later that I could be in relationship with you. So God, in this moment, I ask that you help me turn from my sin, turn from my mess ups, and turn to you. And God, help me follow you every day and learn to love you more and more every day. God, it's your precious name that I pray. Amen.